Okay, so I got a case study here from a contract for deed that I wrapped up recently. This one was in Cincinnati, Ohio. There's a picture of the home here, and I'll run through all the details on why I liked this deal initially and how everything went along and how it eventually turned out. So this is at 1820 Colmar Lane. Like I said, it was a contract for deed. If you're not familiar with those are a little bit different than a traditional mortgage. Contract for deed basically works. I think of them kind of like as an auto loan, whereas if you get an auto loan from the bank, you drive away with the car, but the bank actually holds the title until you pay it off. So in this case, I actually had the deed to the property, but there was this land contract that had the borrower residing in the home, had been there for quite a while. Had an unpaid balance a little over 36,000. My BPO value came back at 60, so there's a lot of equity. P&I 324, and this was 12 months behind. I actually don't recall. There were some payments in the last 12 months, so there were some signs of life, but it was overall 12 months behind when I picked this up. A little under 1,000 square feet. Rental rate was 700, which is good. One of the things I'll look at is this rental rate compared to the P&I. So basically, if these borrowers don't want to stay, they're going to have to pay more to rent a place somewhere else. And that also means that in the event I end up with a house and decide to rent it for some reason, even though that's not my main model, there's a pretty strong rental market in this area. The other thing to note is with the contract for deed, so generally you can do a forfeiture with those, and you're basically just canceling the land contract and evicting the borrower, as opposed to a full foreclosure, like with a mortgage. But different states have their own rules on these. And in Ohio, where this is, if the borrower's paid more than 5 years on the contract for deed, then you still have to go through the full foreclosure process. And this one had been originated in 2011, so they were paying about uh, 1 year behind, maybe about 7 years of payment. So I went into this knowing that if I wasn't able to get this to reperform, that I would have to go through the full foreclosure process. So purchase price was just over 15,000. There was a broker commission, so about 42% of UPB, which is decent price range for non-performing contract for deed. I've paid less certainly at different times, and I've definitely paid more in other situations as well. Picked this up in May of 2018, and I'm recording this now in May of 2019, so about exactly 12 months later. So where this first started to get interesting was after the bid got accepted, the seller said, "Oh, by the way, I've already worked things out with the borrower." So seller had done some loss mitigation with the borrower. Borrower wanted to stay, and they made an agreement where the borrower made a $2,000 good faith down payment to the seller, and the seller agreed to create a new CFD. So they canceled the old one, created a new one, um, and what was good about that was that meant that from that point on, if the borrower didn't perform on the loan, well, then it would be a fairly straightforward forfeiture process. You wouldn't have to go through this foreclosure process that I was assuming. So at this point, basically, I find out I bought what is essentially kind of a performing loan at a non-performing price. So I'm doing a big happy dance at this point. And the May, June, July payments rolled in, and there was another payment that had rolled in as well. So this is a pretty good story. Not something you always expect to happen, but that was great. But then they stopped making payments after July. So the loan stopped performing now at this point. The borrower also stopped paying the water bill. So one of the other wrinkles with contract for deeds, besides the foreclosure law, state to state, city to city, some cities want the water bill to be in the name of the contract for deed owner. This is in Cincinnati. They're one of them. Toledo, Ohio does it as well. Now, per the land contract, the borrower is responsible for all the utility bills, and it even specifies the water. And the city sends a copy of the bill to them. But the bill was in the name of Fusion Notes, and they had stopped paying that. So reached out to the borrower. Borrower said that they had been sending in payments, but the servicer must have just lost them. Now I've had my share of issues with servicers, making mistakes and different things. I haven't had one just lose a couple of payments. However, I went back to the servicer and did check on that. They also said that, oh yeah, we'll take care of the water bill. Sorry about that. And mentioned to the borrower, hey, if you made these payments, provide some evidence and we can get that worked out for the servicer. They never provided that. I did follow up with the servicer and they never saw those other payments. And they also never paid the water bill as well, like they said they would. So at this point, I had to begin the forfeiture process. Had spent a couple months going back and forth with the borrower. They kept saying they were going to pay, and they never did. Weren't able to work anything out. So in October, started the forfeiture process. Turned that over to Satil and Barilli. So I used Franco Barilli for all of my notes in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. Very experienced. Really understand contract for deeds as well as notes. Sometimes you run into attorneys out there who will say they understand contract for deeds, but don't. Ended up with a court date in January, and at this court date, basically everything went my way. The land contract was canceled. The borrower was given notice to leave. I didn't have to go to court for this. I live in Colorado. This is in Ohio, but my realtor was able to show up for me. And then also as part of this forfeiture process, one step of the way, there's a 10-day notice that has to be posted on the borrower's door. The realtor did that for me as well. And I think this is fairly specific to Cincinnati, but the other cities may do this as well. But the person who actually posts the notice is the one who has to go to court. So my realtor really helped me out big time with this. After the hearing, I got a phone call from the borrower. I had spoken to the borrower a couple of times beforehand, so I had her number in my phone. And I picked up not knowing whether, she was going to scream and cuss at me or whatever. It was kind of a sad call. She was just very sad about the whole thing. Said she was very surprised it had gone that way. Now, given that, they weren't paying and didn't respond to anything, I don't know how else they could have expected it to go. At that point, I asked if there was anything they could do. And I, very nicely explained that, well, at this point, it's really too late, to do anything at this point. So now, in gone through the hearing, but the borrower hasn't left yet. So borrower was given, I believe it was 7 days to leave, which is actually kind of harsh. And she had asked me to extend that, but I did not because I have friends in this business who have had situations where they've given borrowers additional time and they've used that time to gut the house of appliances and water heaters and all sorts of things. So stuck to the schedule, but the borrower didn't leave and had to schedule an eviction with the bailiff, which the attorney's office coordinated. And then we get to the end of January, so the water bills are still coming to me. I get the $850 water bill. This was for 1 month. And at this point, I wasn't sure. Well, the first thing I did was I shut the water off right away, but I didn't know if the borrower had left and some pipes froze or if they just ran the water for a month, kind of like the wet bandits in Home Alone. But either way, I had the water shut off immediately. However, this was right around the time that polar vortex was going on. It had been an extremely cold winter. And so I didn't know if I had a lot of damage or not, or just the water bill. I was hoping it was just the water bill. Then we also had to delay the set out for a week because the day that it was originally scheduled for, they were calling for wind chills down to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, one of the coldest days on record, I think, in Cincinnati. So, evicting the borrower on a day like that seemed a little bit over the top. And the cleanout crew didn't want to go out and work in that weather either, quite honestly. So got to February, finally got the bailiff out to do the eviction and got in. And actually it turned out that it was wet bandits. So pipes were okay. House was in decent shape. So I don't know if they just ran the shower for a month or what. My cleanout guy who's been doing REOs for 12, 15 years said he's seen that before. It's not the first time, not completely unheard of, although it had actually been a little while since he had seen it. So I was actually thankful to just have the $850 water bill and not a lot of other damage on top of that. So at this point, we got the home back, or we got REO, so we need to get the REO ready to sell and dispense of it. And, one thing I'll point out is, having a realtor who specializes in REOs is really huge. In this case, I've got a really great team on the ground in Cincinnati, and that just made this whole process a whole lot easier. Because I've done these in other areas where, I had folks that turned out to be not quite as great. So in between the hearing and when, the eviction, they kept an eye on the property, to kind of bird dog it because it was so cold. What I was worried about was the borrower leaving and pipes freezing. So if they did take off, I wanted to know that so I could get the property secured. And they also worked on lining up local vendors to do things like change the locks and then also do the clean out and the set out. I'll show you some pictures here in a moment. Borrowers did leave a lot of junk. I would not call this a hoarder house. I've had at least one other property that was definitely a hoarder house, but there was a lot of junk. It was a bigger clean out than normal, but overall the house was in okay shape underneath all of that. And the other weird thing was, I'll show you a picture of this too. The borrowers left a pickup in the driveway. It was a decent looking Ford F-150, which they did eventually get rid of. When I was doing my initial due diligence, back in April of 2018, the truck was in the same spot and they left it behind when they took off. And when the clean out was happening, I guess the borrower's mother drove by and my realtor talked to her and asked about the truck, if they were going to be removing that. And the borrower's mother said that they had lost the keys. And so that's why they left it there. And so the realtor explained to her that you can go to the dealership, give them the VIN number, and they'll get you a key. And so fortunately, a week or so later, they finally got rid of the truck. So here's some pictures of what it looked like. Here's in the living room. What's interesting is they had some moving boxes, but they didn't actually move too much stuff, it doesn't look like. There's the kitchen area. Like I said, a lot of junk around, but I mean, I had another home one time that literally had like waist deep trash. So this is actually, if you haven't seen one of these before, you might think some of this is bad, but it's really not. They were kind enough to leave some beer in the refrigerator, which was nice. I don't know if the cleanout guys drank that or not. Hopefully they didn't, because God knows how long it was in there. Bathroom, not too bad. All in all, just a lot of junk all over the place. Bedroom, pretty messy. I showed some of these pictures to my kids and told them, I said, if you don't get in the habit of doing this when you're a kid, you don't want your house looking like this when you're an adult. The basement, actually not too bad. All in all, it probably looks better than my basement, honestly. There's the Ford F-150. So again, not a bad truck. I think it had been sitting there idle for years. So it was nice that they were able to come and get rid of that. If they had not removed it, I can't take the truck because I have title to the home, but not to the vehicle. So what I would have needed done if it came to that was pay someone $150 to tow it, where they would take it and then hold it for some period of time, waiting for the owners to claim it, and then it would, I believe, go to them if they didn't. But luckily they took it, so I didn't have to spend the $150 on that. So this is from the set out, and what I mean by that is, so in some cities, Cincinnati being one, this varies city to city, but in some places, when you do a clean out after an eviction, you can just take all the stuff right to the dump. In Cincinnati, you actually have to set everything by the curb for, I believe it's 24 hours, and then come back and then move it. So you actually have to do like a double move. So if you're doing, planning on doing an REO, or have a note that you think is going to foreclosure, that's one of the good things to check on. Because if it's one of these cities where it has the two-step process, you just need to factor in that your cleanout costs are going to be higher than they would otherwise. The other thing that's challenging too is, when they do the set out, there's an appointment with the bailiff. The bailiff gives you 1 hour to get everything out. And they tell you to bring enough crew to get it all done in an hour. Well, the problem is you can't see the inside of the house till you get in, so you don't know how much is in there. There might not be much, there might be twice as much as what was in here. So that's one of the things that's kind of challenging. But fortunately, like I said, I had a crew on the ground who's done a ton of these over the last 12, 15 years in this area. They know the drill and was able to bring enough folks to get this done. So just some more pictures of the stuff sitting out. Like I said, lots and lots of junk sitting out there. and really nasty cold weather too. I think this was the last of the loads, or one of the close to last as they were taking it away. And there's also some damage to the trees. They also did some debris cleanup um, around the yard, and as you see, as the way they're dressed, it was pretty darn cold out there too. That could not have been a fun job, but the team on the ground really kicked butt for me. And then it's time to sell the house. So sold it in April of 2019, so about 11 months afterwards, and ended up selling this to some kind of an investment firm for 48,000. And then the net proceeds of that, so there were the real estate commissions, taxes, title fees, et cetera, ended up netting just over 43 when it was all said and done. And this is kind of my typical MO too, I should say. So if you do one of these and take the home back, you have a lot of options. Some people will do the rehabs themselves. Some people like to do a rehab, turn it into a turnkey rental. For me, I like to just sell the house as is as quickly as possible because my main business is notes, and I don't want to have to do more with REOs than I have to because it's not really my specialty. Now, there are some cases. I've got another one I'm working on right now that I'll have a case study out probably in a couple months where ended up taking on rehab because the house was way worse shape on the inside than what was expected. And so I had to kind of rehab my way out of that one. But generally, I just want to sell these off as quickly as possible, usually to someone who's going to do, fix and flip or turn it into a rental or some other sort of investor. So final numbers, which is what everybody's always interested in. So my total cost basis, 22,961. So I'll explain my cost basis for the note. So earlier on, I mentioned that with the commission, I had paid a little over 15,000, but there were some payments that came in. So the way that this gets tracked in QuickBooks, the principal portion of the payment get deducted from what you paid for the note. So just to make life simple and just pull some of these numbers straight out of QuickBooks, I did it this way. So my theoretical cost basis was a little under 15. In reality, I paid a little over 15. Total holding costs were at about $8,000, and then netted 43,159 from the sale. Again, that sale price was 48, but this is what I actually came away with. So profit on the sale 20,198, which was awesome. And there were also those other payments that had come in. Those three payments plus some other things that had come in. So I ended up with 1812 in interest. So total profit on the deal 22,000. So basically just about 100% total in a little less than a year. So this one was really a home run deal. It's the kind of thing you always hope happens when you do a non-performing note or CFD. It's certainly not an all the time thing. This is definitely, a little bit of an outlier. So if you do these, don't expect to have this happen every time. It makes for a great case study. And these things certainly happen now and then, but realize you're going to have deals that have a whole range of outcomes. And I don't normally do this well on these, that's for darn sure. Now, I did have a joint venture partner on this who is providing the funding. So they put up 23,000 in funding. And basically the way that these joint venture deals work is partner will put up the funding. I'll essentially do most of the work, although I consult with the joint venture partner as things go along, and we coordinate on key decisions, such as accepting a sale price, when to initiate for forfeiture, things like that. So it's very much a partnership. But they put up 23,000 in funding. They received a 50-50 split of the interest payments. And then they got a 50-50 split of the profit on sale, which was 1099. So total they got back was 34, just about 34. So put in 23, got 34 back, slightly less than a year later, which is pretty good. And so they ended up with 48% return. So roughly about almost 100% return total that was split between the two of us. Timeline 11 months, so May of 2018 to April of 2019. So really home run deal overall, really nice to see these. And a lot of where that came from was when the borrower stopped performing, they forfeited a lot of equity, right? I mean, they had a lot of equity in the note. The balance was 36,000. The BPO was 60, and even though I sold it at 48, Borrowers would have been better off just if they really didn't want to pay and not stay, they could have sold their house on their own and scooped a lot of money and then moved along, but they didn't do that. So the expense breakdown, which is another thing that folks are interested in. So how did we get to this $8,000? So 370 of this was servicing, about 700 was delinquent taxes. So I mentioned they weren't paying the water bill. Typically if someone's not paying on their mortgage or contract for deed, they're usually not paying the taxes either, and that's how this one went. Forced place insurance, because they weren't paying that either. Legal expenses were only $922, and I followed up with Satil and Breeley to make sure nothing else was outstanding, and they assured me it wasn't. Normally legal bills for forfeiture are higher than that, but that's the way that this one worked out. I had the realtor do a lot for me besides sell the house, so they showed up for court, they coordinated getting the locks changed, also coordinated with a cleaning crew to get a sales cleaning. And so with some of these things, they just invoiced me directly, and then they dealt with the end vendor. So it was about $650 for other things that ran through the realtor beyond the commission at the final sale. And then you have things like due diligence and other things. So pulling the BPO, O&E report, getting photos taken periodically, other kind shipping documents via FedEx, other things came to $391. And then you get to the two big ones. So there was the $850 water bill, but they weren't paying the water bill throughout. So I ended up stuck with $1,571 in water bills. And that's obviously not normal. I don't think anyone ever budgets for that, but it's interesting that even despite a big surprise like that, this still turned out to be a home run deal. If they wouldn't have just decided to run the water and not pay the bill, it would have done even better. And then the clean out was quite expensive as well. So because they took out, I think it was about 45 cubic yards of stuff out of this house that was a little less than 1,000 square feet and a one-car garage. So that ended up being $2,640. I mean, usually, in a house like that, I'm thinking I may be budgeting like 1,000 to 1,500 for a clean out. So that was definitely, these two things were definitely negative surprises, but deal still worked out great, so not too worried about that. So here's the real important thing, and every deal I do, I always like to take away, what the lessons learned are. Every deal is a little bit unique, has its own wrinkles. So those are all the details in the deal, but what can we really learn from this? And the first thing is there can be a big difference between your BPO value and what you're actually going to net after a sale. So I pulled this BPO of $60,000, and when you're buying notes, you can't see the inside of the house. It's exterior only, so there's some assumptions that have to be made. So for one, there's going to be a limit to your accuracy on your BPO. You can have surprises on the inside. And, if your goal is to sell the house quickly and you're not looking to take on rehab and all of that, you're going to be selling at some discount to the BPO. In this case, I sold about 80% of the BPO, which was good. And then always don't forget, you've got sales commissions and other expenses on the backside. I usually assume that's going to be about 10%. In this case, it was a little bit higher than that. And then, the other thing I like to point out is that these note deals take a lot of weird twists and turns, right? So if you look at this one, there were a lot of good and bad surprises. Initially, bought the note, turned out it was performing, received some payments. That was all great. Then you get into these water bills, it's not performing. And then when they didn't leave and saw how much junk was left behind, thought there might be problems with the house, but then lo and behold, actually, the bones of the house were good. So I think of it as kind of like the game Chutes and Ladders. When I was little, I used to like to play this where, you move along and, sometimes you catch the ladder and something really good happens. Other times you get the big slide. And so as you're going through these deals, I urge you to, just kind of take the good with the bad and don't get too up or too down when anything happens. You basically got to wait till these are done to see how they settle out. So, if you're the kind of person who stresses every time a little something goes wrong or there's uncertainty, then you would have a hard time with non-performing Certainly there was a bit of time in here where I got the water bill where I didn't know if there was massive plumbing damage, whether pipes froze. Um, you're going to have those situations. You just got to learn to deal with them. It's just the nature of the beast. But the thing is, if you do a number of note deals, those breaks are going to even out over time. The other thing is that borrowers aren't always going to act in their own best interest. So, when I went to business school doing my MBA, you kind of are taught to assume that, people you're working with, people you're negotiating with, people you're competing with are rational actors. And, the reality is not everyone always acts rationally. They don't always act in their own best interest. In this case, borrowers forfeited a bunch of equity and just did a lot of stuff that wasn't really in their own best interest. So as you're trying to, um, look at a deal and figure out what a borrower might do, don't be surprised if they do something that just has you scratching your head and it doesn't really make sense, or they do something that you would never do yourself. And then having the good local team is huge. So, obviously I have a great team in Cincinnati. So, now as I shop for notes, um, I'm always keeping my eye out on things in Cincinnati because life is a lot easier if you end up going through a foreclosure or forfeiture if you have that good team on the ground. This is not the actual realtor. This is just some stock footage that I grabbed. So if you'd like more info on note investing or reach out to me, I'm very easy to find. Find me at email me at dan@fusionnotes.com. My website's fusionnotes.com, and then I've also got a YouTube channel where I post case studies like this and other videos to help you out with notes. Thanks.